I spoke earlier about the need to restore trust in our institutions, and to do that, a good first step is to elect leaders who lead with honor, integrity, and civility. More importantly, I spoke about the need for each of us to answer the question, what will it take for us to get off the couch? Our next speaker did just that. He was deep into his career in the private investment business and leading a great organization. He had a distinguished career and was making a difference both professionally and philanthropically in his community. And then he was called to serve. As a business partner of his in the past, he called in early 2020 and asked my advice about what he would do, what he was thinking about doing, and I thought he was crazy. I gave him that look, the look your son gives you or your daughter gives you, and he replied, thanks for your advice, but I think I'm gonna do it anyway. I think his wife, Suzanne, an SMU alum, had a much more powerful endorsement, and I'm glad that she was there for him. The governor grew up in Richmond and Virginia Beach, attended Norfolk Academy before heading to Rice. After Rice, he did a brief stint on Wall Street before going to Harvard for his MBA. And then after a brief stint at McKinsey, he settled on a very long and distinguished career at the Carlyle Group that took him all over the world and exposure to industries that are too many to mention. His last post was as co-CEO of the firm when he left that firm to run for governor, and the rest is history. Since he took office, he has governed effectively in a purple state with a General Assembly that has a Senate controlled by the Democrats and the House is controlled by the Republicans. But as a Republican governor, he understood that he needed bipartisan support to get things across the finish line. He has emphasized his commitment to creating a more transparent and accountable government and assigned measures to make that happen. His priorities are around education, quality of life, and economic development. But he has taken his brand of optimistic, principled leadership wherever he's gone. And we are lucky that he is here today. Please join me in welcoming the 74th governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin.
Thank you. Thank you. Ken, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. We're still morning.
It's still morning.
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Thrilled
Governor
to be
Youngkin.
here. I mean, this is pretty special. Come on.
We like it.
Yeah.
All these people help pay for it, which is really nice.
Thank you for paying for it.
So I mentioned that, you've taken your brand of optimism with you to the State House, which is amazing. But before I even get to optimism, you look like you're having fun, and I want to show a clip that I think demonstrates that. I want to have you comment on this.
When Governor Glenn Youngkin promised to bring back the spirit of Virginia, we didn't think he'd go this far. But frankly, the mascots in the hallways have livened things up a bit. We thought he was talking about state pride, the economy, not mascots. But hey, it's unorthodox. Maybe Governor Glenn Youngkin could make a difference.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Now, I'm not going to talk about March Madness.
That was the worst bracket ever selected in national history. It was just awful. Did anybody get anybody in the Final Four? I mean, come on. Did anybody get that? See, look, nobody.
That's right.
Not a
I
single
had
one in here.
UVA going farther than Princeton, and I'm embarrassed by that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so are you having fun?
I'm having a ball. It's an extraordinary privilege to go to work every day in a way that I have never felt before. And some of it is the opportunity to go to work for 8.7 million Virginians. Some of it is the history that I have to live in. I mean, we're mandated to live in the governor's mansion, which is quite a privilege. It was built 210 years ago. It was procured by Monroe, and I walk out my front door, and there's our Capitol that was designed by Thomas Jefferson, and I take a right to go to my office, which is in the Patrick Henry building, and this is Virginia, and so every day I'm reminded of the opportunity to do things that serve Virginians. And then finally, it has been so encouraging because in a state where everybody told me you're never going to get anything done, we're getting a ton done. And so I think that Virginians appreciate it. I know we're having a ball. I've got the best first lady at the state level in America. And I corrected, and I got that right. I got that right. And we're having a great time. And so I would say if anybody has a midlife crisis, run for governor. It's a great job. Great job.
It worked once. Now, so your message has really been unifying. Diagnose that for a minute. What nerve do you think you tapped into?
Well, I think, first of all, Virginia had really had a tough run because during the pandemic particularly, my predecessor had taken an incredibly stern position on lockdowns with schools and businesses and houses of worship and mandating vaccines and masks and everything else. And Virginians didn't take to that well. And so there was this real unification moment about reaffirming individual liberties and freedoms. And as we began to really connect in with both our rural Virginians and urban Virginians, what we found is that this wasn't Republicans against Democrats. This was Virginians really wanting to reignite the spirit of Virginia that had been really forged by Washington and Jefferson and Madison and Monroe and Patrick Henry. And this is history that Virginians still carry. And so there was just a moment where the idea that we are going to put government back in its rightful position, which is to be of, for, and by the people, as opposed to telling them what to do all the time, was just fully embraced. And for those of you that don't know Virginia well, I mean, this is a purple state by definition. You know, we have about 35% Republicans and a little over 40% Democrats, and everybody else is, you know, a staunch independent. And as a result, understanding the psychology and the emotion of Virginians, I think, is very reflective of understanding America's. And there's just there was an underlying frustration that what they knew was right had been violated. And we stepped in at a time where they were willing to really make a change and to elect an outsider who was just bringing a very different perspective and to really stand behind a direction that was going to be fundamentally different from where we were going. It was an incredibly unique time. And
do you think it was COVID specific, or that was just the last straw?
I think it was definitely the last straw of a series of events. And Ken, it really was across all aspects of Virginians' perception of where the state was going. You know, we had previous administrations, and I know we'll talk about education, but I think it's really important to highlight previous administrations that had taken what was revered as one of, if not the best, K-12 school system in America, and they had degraded the standards. And Virginia used to have the highest standards for proficiency, and they had made them the lowest standards of proficiency, all in the pursuit of making sure that the schools looked good. And they had, on top of that, highlighted that the curriculum was no longer going to focus on things like accelerated math. And this was just a huge shift in Virginians' perspectives on what was right and wrong in education. And that was confounded by the recognition that when you have an approach to crime and you have an approach to police that in fact puts criminals first and victims last, and you see a 20-year high in murder rates, there's a problem, and we can recognize that. And finally, Virginians had become very comfortable watching people move away faster than they moved to our state from the other 49. And this 9-year outflow of Virginians was becoming very apparent. And so this was a cumulative recognition that our state was heading in the wrong direction, and it was time to readjust and head to a different destination.
So let's talk about then, because you've been in office about 15 months, but you hit the ground running and you really brought an executive leadership style, starting with the transition and right into the very first set of priorities. Talk to us about how, you know, we hear about the swamp and about civil servants and all that, but I think in your approach was to embrace the staff and actually empower them more. Talk about your approach.
Well, the first thing we knew is that we had spent 10 months making a lot of promises, and I kept a list, and I put the list on the board, and I said, now we got to go do all these things, team. And I was surprised that the media reaction to that was, well, what's he doing? He's actually trying to deliver on what he promised. And I think we've just gotten in this really inappropriate standard that promises aren't to be kept. And I just was raised differently. And so we went to work to deliver on our promises. Many of them were not legislative promises. They were operational, executional, and efficiency promises to make government work better. And what I found as I traveled to each one of our agencies and departments, and I would sit down at our Department of Education with the senior leadership, most of whom are career state employees, was that a very similar theme every time. I would ask, so, what do you do and are you good at it? And what are your objectives for the year? And are you on budget or not? And I got very similar answers. Well, of course we're good at what we do. And I'd say, well, how do you know? And they'd say, well, we got an award. And I'd say, okay, that's great, you got an award, but we actually need to set some goals and hit them. And then I would say, so are you on budget? And they would say, well, we don't know because we don't have monthly budgets. But we'll tell you at the end of the year. And so we stepped back and we said, we've got to start all over again. And we injected into government a whole series of objective setting and then measurements that could feed back whether we're on plan or off plan. And that allows us to have a common language and a common conversation across 55,000 people. And a year plus into it, now every meeting can start with objectives and key results. And every month meeting that we have with our monthly management reviews focuses on how we're doing against the overall goals for the department and are you on budget or not. Now, what was really exciting was we're 4 months in and our Secretary of Finance comes to me and when you have extraordinary people around you, they can do extraordinary things. And Steve Cummings, who's our Secretary of Finance, had run Wachovia and UBS. And I mean, this guy he knew finance. And he came in and he said, Governor, I think we found $1.2 billion that's been appropriated that doesn't need to be spent. We're 4 months in. And I said, well, that's great. That goes into our taxpayer relief fund and our reserves. But now let's get $2 billion next year. And so now people are a little hesitant to come tell me they've done good things because I double the objective for the next year. But what we've really seen is that you really can increase the velocity of operational change in government. You just have to go do it. And the first person we hired into our cabinet was a chief transformation officer. And I dipped into a network at McKinsey, and a guy named Eric Miller, who was the chief transformation officer at McKinsey, came into state government. And I put him on our toughest problems. See, I know that the Texas DMV is probably really good, but the one in Virginia was really in rough shape. And you'd go there and you'd have to wait nearly 45 minutes before anybody would even say hello to you. And today, you'll wait 8 to 9 minutes, and it'll take you 8 to 9 minutes to get your business done. And that's just 1 year of transforming government's perspective on how to treat the citizens of Virginia like your customers.
Well, having sat through your monthly objectives and goals meetings, I know that you were pushing
Thank you.
To increase the urgency, so glad the state's responding.
Ken, I only get 4 years, right? The clock is ticking every day. And if we take a day off, then that means it was a day missed.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about education, because that obviously grabbed the nation's attention during your campaign. People probably wouldn't have picked it up until I saw it. I wouldn't have picked it up and put these two together, but you've instituted a $4 billion tax cut, at the same time a 10% teacher raise. At the same time, you really put pressure on the educational system. So this is a really tough time to be fixing education, which we all know is so important. How have you been able to approach that in where there's lots of incumbency, let's say, that resists change?
There is, but we also have to start with all agreeing that there's a problem. Because if we don't agree there's a problem, then there will be no unity in embracing a solution. And so our first step was to get everybody on board that we have a problem. And I just want to step back. Government isn't great at embracing real data. They selectively use data to prove the point that they want to make and tend to ignore the data that doesn't prove their point. And so we stepped back, and our Secretary of Education is just a total rock star, Amy Guidera, and we went to work to highlight the fact that Virginia students had suffered. And we had our own state testing, which are called standard of learning testing that happen every year. We had the national report card. We had, of course, AP results that were all coming out of the 2021 and the beginning of 2022 school year. And the data consistently showed that Virginia students had suffered more than the national average, and in some cases had the largest learning loss in the nation. Now, again, this is Virginia. We were a destination for people to come for schools. And what the NAEP score showed was that Virginia had the largest learning loss in the nation in 4th grade reading and math. This is a wake-up call for everybody, and one that we needed to unify at least an understanding that we had a real problem. And now we got to go address it. And we've got to address it with a multifaceted approach, because no difficult problem has a single solution. There's no magic wand to this stuff. And therefore, we stepped back and said, first thing we've got to address are standards. We've got to raise standards back up and make them the best in the country, not the worst. Excellence matters. But on top of that, we've got to bring resources to support those schools that are perennially underperforming. Let's get reading coaches and math coaches into those school systems, and let's bring some of our best teachers by giving them a bonus to go work in some of our tougher school areas. We then recognized that we've got a fundamental challenge in teachers. Folks, this is a tough job. I mean, with law enforcement and healthcare and nursing and teaching, those are the toughest professions in our country. And so we needed to put through a meaningful pay raise. And so we put through in our budget a 10% increase in pay. Then we recognized that parents, of course, were no longer at the table in so many circumstances, not to mention at the head of the table. And so we really tackled putting parents back in charge of their children. And what a concept. What a concept, that we're going to allow parents to make decisions for their children as opposed to dictating to parents what happens to their kids. And this was tough because I signed an executive order on day one that enabled parents to make a decision about whether their children wear a mask or not, because Virginia had still mandated masks in school. And we had legal battles, and then all of a sudden, reasonable Democrats stepped across the line and said, we'll pass legislation with you. And we passed bipartisan legislation to empower parents to make decisions for their children, whether they wear a mask or not, whether educational materials are consistent with their family values, and if they're not, they can ask for a substitute. We put forth new model policies that empower parents to make the most important decisions in this world of gender theory. Well, parents need to make that decision, not administrators and teachers. And this is a parent's decision with their child. And what we found was that this multifaceted approach, finally, when we add choice, and we add tax-driven scholarship funds for families that can't afford to move to a private school. We inject our own version of charter schools, which we call lab schools, that all of a sudden Virginia went from virtually having none to having 20 in motion in 6 months. And we got a big gap to make up because Virginia is way behind. But this collection of ingredients into an educational reform was something that was embraced by lots of people, not just Republicans, because we all agreed that we had a problem we have to fix.
So identifying the problem, obviously, is a great place to start, and surrounding yourself with great people. Amy Guidera has been very helpful with the Bush Institute education work.
Amazing.
And also a woman who works for her deputy, Mackenzie Snow, is one of our Presidential Leader Scholars alumni.
She is.
So besides Mackenzie and former bankers, you actually, been glad to be some help.
I live by a basic rule, which is hire smart people, and it'll go pretty well.
Okay, so let's talk about competitiveness, because the next step to education is then competitiveness. And one of the things that you've done very recently is sign the Occupational Licensing Transferability Act. And explain that and why that's so important.
Well, in short, we all have a workforce problem, let's just be clear. We've got a workforce problem that is a result of paying people not to work for a long period of time and watching labor participation go down to levels that we haven't seen in decades. And getting folks back into the labor force is critical. But on top of that, in Virginia, we had about 1% economic growth for 8 years. And I have really throttled down. We've had 125,000 jobs added to our active workforce just in the last 12 months. We need more people. And so I was really frustrated by all the hurdles that have been put in place to make it hard to come from another state like Texas to Virginia and go to work right away. And so we just made it easier through 85 job categories. You have a license in another state, come to Virginia, and you can go to work right away. This idea of workforce development is at the heart of our economic future, and it does tie into education as well. I think one of the real challenges that we have is the notion that has been placed in everyone's head that if your child doesn't go to a 4-year university and get a degree, then they will never be successful, which we know is not true. And of course, we heard on the earlier panel about the number of men who are choosing not to go get a college degree. So we've got to prepare for a very different opportunity set, and one that enables us through our high schools to prepare people to go to work. And so one of the things that we are working feverishly on is to blur the lines between high school and community colleges. And so we're expanding dual enrollment in a way that I eventually aspire by the time we're done at the end of our term that every Virginia high school student will have the opportunity to earn an industry-recognized credential and go right to work, whether that's a nursing assistant or a welder or a truck driver or a cyber analyst. Go to work. And we've got to open up these multiple pathways for Virginians and Americans, I believe, that aren't really part of this one-size-fits-all kind of standard that's been shoved down everybody's throat. This is all about opportunity. The economy will present it as manufacturing jobs are coming back to America in droves. A lot of them are coming to Virginia. I want to make sure we have a workforce that can take advantage of that.
Okay, and that's also keeping a workforce healthy. And I know that mental health is an area that when you got into office, you were shocked to find.
Yeah, no, I think we're all fully aware of the fact that Virginia and America, Texas, are in the middle of a behavioral health crisis. And the systems weren't prepared for what we're dealing with. They just weren't, and they're completely overwhelmed. And they're overwhelmed with our kids, they're overwhelmed in the workplace, they're overwhelmed with our senior citizens. And that overwhelmed behavioral health system, unfortunately, is not helping the number of people we need to help, which is resulting in record suicide rates and violence in the workplace, violence to oneself, violence to others. And we got to get at this. And so we step back, and just like you would do if you were launching a new business, we zero-baselined it and said, what should our behavioral health system look like? And there's some really great standards out there. Arizona has done a super job. And so we picked the best of the best around the nation and created something called our Right Help Right Now system. And I've gone back to our legislators and I said, listen, I know we spend an extraordinary amount of money on this already, but we need to put another $600 million in this, $230 in a budget amendment, plus what we already had in our budget. And we have to build capacity. Capacity before people have a crisis, capacity when they're in a crisis, and capacity after a crisis. We've got to embed resources in schools. We have to use telemedicine. We've got to develop a pipeline of psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners. We got work to do, friends. And this is not, again, a magic wand we can wave on one topic. And what's been so encouraging is that on this topic, unlike many of them, everybody puts their political swords down and goes to work. And so I really do believe that Virginia will lead the nation in how to re-engineer and restructure a behavioral healthcare system that is able to give Virginians, and hopefully as we can export it to other places, Americans, the right help when they need it.
And you felt like that when you presented the problem, again, like you said, people put their political parties aside?
They do. It's not, this is a topic that every single family has been exposed to in some form or another. And one of our close family friends lost a son to fentanyl poisoning, and he thought he was taking one thing and it was something else, and he didn't wake up. And we've all been touched by this: substance abuse, depression, real sense of a desire to take one's life. I mean, it is horrific. And so this is one of these moments where we know that what we need to do is fix something that's broken, and we can come together and do it.
That's great. So our theme today is entitled Answering the Call. And I want to pull the lens back a little bit and ask...
Do we get caller ID on that?
Yeah, you can get caller ID on that.
Okay.
How would you talk to Americans about our role in the democracy? How would you diagnose, given you've been all over the state, Virginia is as representative as any state for the country. What did you find on the campaign trail, and how are you thinking about kind of the state of where we are today?
Well, I think, first of all, we've allowed ourselves to fall into, I think, a trap of grievance politics. And grievance politics is I think, underpinned by a myopic focus on oneself. Now, of course, we're worried about our issues. And when I meet with Virginians and we sit around the proverbial kitchen table, of course, we hear about issues that are impacting their lives from our veterans that are unable to access the services that they want, from parents who are frustrated with what's happening with their children, from our elderly that are worried about the kind of care they're going to get, from a young high school junior who I met recently who was worried about the kind of job that was going to be available for them. I mean, these are all the exact things that people should be worrying about. However, we also have to recognize that if we forget that we have to come together to work towards that proverbial shining city on the hill, and it's going to require us to get there, then we've lost all of the requirement to work together. And this is what I have really observed as I've had a chance to travel Virginia extensively. And as you said, Virginia is a microcosm for our nation. And what I hear over and over again is a desire to believe that it can in fact be better. But people's trust has been broken. And so that's why I'm so encouraged that we're making such strides, bringing common sense, yes, conservative solutions to these kitchen table issues. And we're seeing Virginia pivot live. I mean, I always enjoy ribbon cuttings and all those kinds of things, but it's the job numbers that matter. I love the fact that somebody anecdotally will come up to me and say, well, I just moved here from wherever, Ohio or Florida or New York or California. I love that. But what I love is when I look at the U-Haul data and see that Virginia is now 5th in the nation of one-way U-Haul trips. People are moving to Virginia. You know, we were 31st the year before last, and now we're 5th. I love the fact that parents now are going to receive this summer an individual report on how their child is doing in school. And parents are so excited to get this kind of information about their children. I love the fact that we've seen the enrollment in our police training academies starting to increase, and we're seeing people come to Virginia from other states and enroll in law enforcement. I had the best, and now I'm going to an anecdotal story, but I'm in New York, and I'm going up in one of those tall towers in New York, and there's a security guy there. And I just struck up a conversation with him. I said, who are you? Where are you from? And he said, you know, my name's Larry. And I said, well, tell me about you. And he said, well, I'm getting ready to get married, and I'm getting ready to have a child. And I said, well, that's awesome. And he said, and I can't think I can do it here. And I said, you should come to Virginia. And so meanwhile, our security detail was with us, and I asked one of the sergeants who was with me, Chris, I said, Chris, would you just exchange cards with this guy? 3 weeks later, he was enrolled in our state police academy, and he's moving to Virginia. So, you know.
And he rented a U-Haul.
And he rented a U-Haul to get there. I mean, this is good stuff. I mean, come on. But I think this is part of demonstrating that we can do better. And when we collectively believe we can do better, we will. And that's why I think that grievance politics has run its course, and we've got to put it down.
Well, and I do think that there's so many people who will corner a politician and say, this is what I need you to do. The question I have is, what should governments not do?
Yeah.
Have you had to exercise restraint?
Yeah, it's one of the realities when you step in as a newly elected governor, in my case, and you step into a Virginia system where the budget that you inherit is one that was submitted by the previous governor on his or her way out the door. Right? Wait a minute, no, I get to do a budget. Didn't I just get elected? No, that's not the way it works. You get the last person's budget. And so you constantly have to figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And this is how we go find billions of dollars of money that doesn't need to be spent. Now, a lot of it is mandated through a bill that was passed, and it's in code. You must. And so we actually put together lists of things that we're going to go back to our legislative session and try to get a bill passed to stop doing them. Because the way government works, I know this is going to shock all of you, is they continue to do everything that they're doing, and then they add new stuff on top. And that's why government grows 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% a year for a long period of time, and you wake up, and a state like Virginia, which 10 years ago had a $13 or $14 billion general fund budget, now has a $30 billion general fund budget, and we get $40 billion from the federal government, and now we're running a $70 billion government, and it can be reset. We've just got to stop doing some things.
And that kind of restraint, having a government that works smarter, do you think that that's transferable to the federal level as well?
Well, let me first begin with one of the things it does is it energizes the workforce. Now, I know this is kind of shocking, but I don't have stock options that I can hand out the workforce, and we don't have bonuses that we can really pay, although we're trying to put merit pay in. But we do celebrate wins, and it's hugely important when you have wins that the folks that are doing the work get credit. And when you walk into a meeting and you say, hi, my name's Glenn, I'm the governor, and I'd like to start measuring everything that you're doing and report it back, they immediately go run for cover. They say, this is going to be a disaster. And then I always follow up with, let me just tell you my job. My job is to step forward and take the arrows for you. And my job is also to allow you to celebrate the success when we have it. And none of them believed me until we had our first misstep. And I stepped forward and I said, that's on me. That's on me. I'm the governor. And then all of a sudden, people started to, well, wait a minute. Maybe we can, in fact, take some risk and do some things that might not be successful, but he'll cover for us. This is a hugely important trust factor in a workforce, and you know this from running businesses. How that translates to the federal government, there's people here who have a lot more experience than me in the room, clearly. But the principles have to be the same, which is one, you got to show up. Second of all, they have to know what their expectations are and that there will be accountability, but there'll also be resources to redirect and fix. And finally, you have to value people. And the number one thing I always hear from our agencies and departments as I systematically visit them is just a sincere thank you for coming. We've never seen a governor here before, not to mention a secretary. And I just think that's part of our job.
And do you think your private sector background has been a help? Or do people look at you like you're going to be passing through and they can wait you out?
Well, I have this intense urgency to everything we do. And so I'm challenging everybody, just try to wait me out. We're going to move quick, and you got to keep up. I'll go back. I think that there was a little skepticism at the beginning that the many things that we were putting in motion all at one time we're going to have a sustained effort behind them. But it didn't take long to break down that suspicion. And the sustained effort has continued, and the successes are really building momentum across a workforce that I think really, really appreciates it.
That's great. And so now, as you're a veteran of your office after a good 15 months in a legislative session, what are you most optimistic about for your state right now?
Well, I'm first most optimistic about the fact that we can take very, very challenging problems and bring very complicated solutions, and we can move them all at one time. and make real progress. This is something that we do in business. We know this. I didn't know if it was going to transfer in government, folks. It does. But what I'm also excited about is seeing how we can bring people together in order to truly transform things. And Ken, I'll share with you, there's a city outside Richmond called Petersburg, Virginia. And Petersburg, Virginia, it has really suffered. They're near the bottom in just about every state ranking, from educational outcomes and crime outcomes and economic growth and life expectancy. And so I got to know the mayor, and I think if I got more than 10% of the vote in this city, I'd be surprised. But I got to be friends with the mayor, and I stepped back and I said, let's run an experiment together. Let's comprehensively try to empower Petersburg across all elements: crime, education, health outcomes, workforce development and job development, transportation infrastructure investment, and community building. Let's get the churches back engaged in Petersburg. Let's get the nonprofits back engaged in Petersburg. And so he looked at me, he said, I'm in. And so we launched last summer. And the First Lady and I spend a lot of time in Petersburg. And what we have found is that the gravity pull of activity and progress creates a self-fulfilling destination that people want to be part of. And so today, we've got 42 different initiatives, 70 corporate or nonprofit partners running across all these areas. The chief of police in Petersburg told me recently that in the last 6 months, violent crime has gone down over 65% in Petersburg. Because guess what? We put more cops on the street, and it works. And we all of a sudden have multi-$100-million developments going on in Petersburg, and the developers are running, trying to get the corner block to build something. And we have the YMCA and communities and schools working in order to expand before school and after school and weekend programs in the elementary schools. And we ran a Shark Tank. And we got $500,000 in the Founders Fund, and we handed out $25,000 grants to businesses for entrepreneurs to get started. And now there's a whole round of folks wanting to do it again. We partnered with the local historically black college there, Virginia State, and we're tutoring kids in the highest. I mean, it's comprehensive. And what has been really fun is that this isn't government doing it. It's just facilitating and believing that they can do it. And this city is transforming.
That's great. Now, being governor, I know can be a little bit lonely, and you have a partner who has strong connections to this community, as well as a son. But let's talk about the role of the First Lady in getting all this stuff done and being there for you, for the state.
Well, first of all, I have to admit, I didn't fully disclose to my amazing wife, Suzanne, that the role of First Lady in Virginia is a full-time job. And so she tells me, she says, yes, I'm off to do my job that I didn't interview for. And it's amazing to watch her go, because everybody says up front, well, what's your First Lady's agenda going to be? And she said, I don't really have one. I want to celebrate goodness across the Commonwealth of Virginia when everybody talks about badness. And I want to support the governor's agenda. And so we have gravitated towards some very important issues. One, she is a huge advocate for women and girls and creating opportunities for women and girls, workforce and education and healthcare support. But we started a series of awards, which we call the Spirit of Virginia Award, and we hand out 6 a year. And there's a coffee table book if anybody wants one. We can put it next to your book, which would be great. But I think this idea of shining a bright light on good works is so important. But then she has been the absolute face of our efforts in combating fentanyl and overdoses, and our efforts in behavioral health. And I've sat in rooms with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and I've watched her open up a listening session that's supposed to be focused on me, and I literally will wander around the back of the stage and sit down because she's got it. And it's amazing to watch the work that she's able to do, and it's so much fun to be doing it with her.
Great. And to put a good SMU education and
absolutely.
practice.
She does wear her pony stuff around all the time, which I keep telling her that doesn't quite fit. But
in the limited time we have left, I'd like to do a little lightning round.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Can I pass if I don't like
You
it?
can pass if you want. I may ask it again. If democracy were a stock, would you be long or short?
I would be long. I would be long, but I'd want a management change along the way, I think.
Good. Who is your favorite founding father?
That's like asking me which one of my children I love most. And this is not a lightning round, but I'm just going to tell you, I got a lot to choose from in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But at the heart, you know, we had a sword in Washington, and we had a pen in Jefferson and Madison, and we had the voice of democracy, of this great American experiment in Patrick Henry. And each of them, when you George Mason wrote our Bill of Rights, and I mean, it's just an amazing group of founders that I am fascinated with, and I live among them. I mean, their portraits hang in my home, and when I walk to work, I walk by a statue in their buildings. But I have to say, each one had such a monumental impact on our outcome, and none of them would have been able to accomplish it on their own. It took all of them. I'm particularly in awe of George Washington. And when you think about everything that he did and the way that he went about his work, you can put it to the side when you remember that he voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms of president, and he left and went back to his beloved Mount Vernon. And he said, I trust the people that are there. It's their job now.
Great.
That's just amazing.
Okay.
That's lightning round.
That's the lightning round. Speaking of impact, which teacher had the biggest impact on you, any grade?
So I had great teachers, and I know we all have those that we remember. There are many of them. But I'm always reminded there was a woman named Pat Hume in 9th grade who gave me my very first C in life. And boy, she shook me. And I think it was on like the Canterbury Tales or something, which I think everybody gets a C in, so I didn't feel that bad about it. But Pat Hume woke me up.
That's great. What are you binge watching right now?
What do you watch? What do you binge watch on? Oh, a television.
No,
oh, okay. That would require me to turn the television on.
Never mind. I'll consider that a pass. Who picked out your red vest?
I did, and my wife has now redesigned her own. Yeah.
Great. And what keeps you up at night?
I sleep really well. I have to be honest. My head hits the pillow, I'm out.
Well, I'm tired just listening to you. I'd say that the sense of urgency that you brought to your office is so phenomenal. And the first step that I take away to restoring trust is valuing your team, and that means taking the arrows for them. I'm honored that you're here. Thank you. Please help me in thanking the Governor of Virginia.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, so much fun. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.